Thank you so much for joining the National Civic League's November webinar, Embedding Engagement in Climate Policy. My name is Rebecca Trout, and I am the Program Director of the All-America City Awards and Communications here at the National Civic League. For those of you less familiar with the League, we are a 127-year-old nonprofit, and we aim to advance civic engagement to create more equitable and thriving communities. The All-America City Awards is probably our most well-known program. It's been around since 1949, and we recognize outstanding local achievements in civics through this awards program. And then we use this webinar series to really share those promising practices, as we call them. Just a little bit before we dive into today's webinar, I want to give a quick shout out to the 2022 winning communities of the All-America City Award. The 2022 awards were co-convened with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. So the 10 communities that you see on your screen were recognized for their outstanding efforts of using housing as a platform to really improve the prospects for early school success and equitable learning recovery. Some really great stories and efforts happening in these communities that you can read more about on our website, and you can even watch their live presentations from their awards process. And then, of course, this year, we are at it again. We are focused on youth engagement this coming year with a particular emphasis on efforts and projects, programs that are addressing the health and well-being of young people while involving them in the framing of those issues and co-producing those solutions. You'll see those important dates on your screen here. I just want to lift up one that is coming up soon. Letters of intent are due on December 15th. We ask for those letters of intent, not really to hold your feet to the fire, but it helps us to know how many people are interested, to give you more direct one-on-one assistance with that application process. And then it has the added benefit of you by reducing your application cost by about $100. So consider getting that letter of intent into us by December 15th if you are at all interested in applying this year. And I'll send more information about the award in the follow-up email from this webinar. But without further ado, I want to focus on today's topic, which is oftentimes near and dear to the heart of young people as it greatly impacts their futures. We're going to be focusing on how to embed civic engagement in climate policy. The League was happy to participate in a convening of about 45 individuals focused on either civic engagement and or climate policy earlier this spring. The organizers of that gathering then took the recommendations from that group and put them into a report, which the fearless leader, Carmen Siriani, is going to talk a little bit more about here today, talking about some of those specific recommendations, as well as sort of next steps in regards to how those recommendations can inform policy and investment in the coming years. And then we will also be joined by Mary Ellen Sprinkle and Marlene Mazik, who will be focused on the Climate Core recommendation and the specific ongoing activities of the Core Network and the USDA Forest Service. Before I hand it off to them, just a few housekeeping items. You will notice that everyone is muted. We ask you to remain that way out of respect for our speakers. We will have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So as those questions come to you, feel free to put them in the chat, or we can use the raise hand feature at the end of the webinar. You'll notice that we are recording. The recording, as well as these slides, will be sent to you either later today or early tomorrow. And with that, I'm happy to get started, and Carmen is going to kick us off. Carmen? Great.
Well, thanks so much for everybody for being there. I looked at some of the names, and some of you guys I know from many years, and I wanted to thank Rebecca especially. And I will say the National Civic League and some of its key leaders have been mentors for me over many years when I first got into this line of business. So special thanks to the League, and of course to Mary Ellen and Marlene for joining today. Just want to give a brief overview of the project, how it came about, and then say a few things about one of the topics within it, sustainable cities. The report is, as you see here, and as you got in your email, it's online. It's like 100+ pages. We work very hard on it. And so let me see, slip me down a bit and I'll just give you a little sense. Do you have that? Can you go down a bit, Rebecca? Yeah. So first of all, this was a collaborative project. I and some colleagues began a couple years ago, pulling together folks from the field of practice, public engagement, scholars, people who have been public officials or were still actively public officials to try to think through what are the challenges of civic engagement in an era of climate change, climate disruption, and of course, at this point, we have to add, an underlying or related crisis of democracy. Our goal was, first to enrich our democratic imagination, how cities and communities are already responding, but then also to expand our policy options, to figure out how the things that have been going on in communities or through various government grant programs and the like could be leveraged for much greater impact in the years ahead, since we know this climate crisis will be with us for a long time. And even if, and hopefully we will get a good handle on reducing emissions and mitigation, but we know that the disruption in terms of communities will be still significant. And if we don't deal with this in a small d democratic way, a robust civic way, we will be at a profound disadvantage. So we picked sort of 12 fields of research. We could have done a few more. We only had a couple days where there was significant civic innovation occurring, and I'll put the slide on in a second of those 12. Over the period of a year and a half, 2 years, we formed some teams, generally mixed, a couple scholars, a couple practitioners, leaders in their field, heads of associations, and, to work team by team in figuring out, well, what is going on in that arena, what needs to go on, what are the capacity building challenges and the like. And then, trying to highlight those opportunities and challenges in each field, and then also to use our teams to think across how can we put this together in a much more coherent framework going forward. And for that, we convened our workshop at American Institute of Architects. Joel Mills and the Center for Communities Design was absolutely critical in hosting us there. We had partners such as the Kettering Foundation, and Tisch College at Tufts University, and Peter Levine, Valerie Lemmy, etc. And the key thing you see in this purple line at the bottom is, we know that a lot's going on. We know that foundations and local groups and cities can do a huge amount, and many are doing a lot. But how could federal agencies across the federal government that have any relevance to climate, ecology, environment, transportation, health, etc., those kinds of issues, how can they leverage resources and provide leadership to help build appropriate forms of civic capacity, those that can be well aligned with all the other tools? No one's pretending here that civics is the sort of magic bullet for everything. We know that there are plenty of other climate tools. And then also specifically, what are the opportunities at the level of the White House for thought leadership, of course, and public communication, etc., but actually using perhaps one of the offices like the Office of Domestic Climate Policy to kind of ratchet these things further in a coherent framework going forward. We don't expect that to happen tomorrow or even next year, although we keep looking, and we found a good number of agency partners to really help us learn how to do that. So let me go to the next slide there. And these are the 12 areas. They overlap in sustainable cities and communities and planning. This is the most obvious for people at the National Civic League, of course. But a number of these others could fit into a sustainable cities framework, but have their own institutional, intellectual foundations, environmental justice movement, and particularly those parts of the EJ movement that have moved towards collaboration and partnership at the community level. And I know I and several of the people who were at our meeting, had pioneered the CARE program, Community Action for a Renewed Environment. It's a very innovative program, and it's been on many of the congressional bills in the last couple of years. It's something to be revived. But you can see there also urban and community forestry, the USDA Forest Service has been extremely important, but they range. Some of them are rural as collaborative community conservation. Some of them cross all these areas, such as environmental education, digital toolkits, narrative toolkits, citizen science, how to generate high quality, locally based knowledge that respects what the community knows, and that can be melded, blended with professional science and the like. And then those, a couple other areas that really do knit across all of them. One, of course, we're going to hear from, Mary Ellen and Marlene, is a civilian climate corps, building on AmeriCorps and the core network and the kind of work that folks have been doing on the ground for a while, has the capacity to work in so many arenas and help, again, knit together many different approaches. And I would add environmental education certainly forms, is one of those as well. And I put at the last bullet sort of civic professionals. And one of the emphases of our project has been, we draw upon the work of Albert de Zoor and others familiar to National Civic Review and other folks writing on professionals, that unless we engage professionals as civic partners rather than know-it-all people with the expertise who can tell us, oh, this is what we need to do for climate change, for emissions reduction, for sustainability, et cetera. Unless we do that, the community efforts will really fall short. We absolutely need professionals as partners. So one of the emphases of the report is really, how do we leverage professional associations, architects, planners, schools, professional schools that are training the next generation of people so that they know how to work with communities, that they enhance democracy rather than creating further skepticism or resentment of elites, something we can really not afford to have going forward. We already have too much of that in our politics. If we don't have professionals as true, robust partners, we're going to be much weaker than we would be otherwise. So let me just say a couple things about sustainable cities and communities, which is on the next slide, so that we leave enough time for for our other speakers. The first thing, and the last book I wrote was called Sustainable Cities in American Democracy. And I took a look at, and of course I've read many of the works of our other partners and the like. What's clear is that over a couple decades, various kinds of civic associations, watershed associations, bicycle associations, neighborhood associations, land trusts, all kinds of groups have been carving out a piece of creative work or multiple pieces of creative work at the local level. And over time, particularly over the 1990s and then into the 2000s, this work was pulled together into a frame that was called Sustainable Cities and Communities, Resilient, Environmentally Just Sustainabilities, various kinds of terminologies. But the idea that at the city level, obviously smaller cities as well as larger cities, a range of strategies could be brought together in a, let's say, integrative fashion, so that bicycle planning and neighborhood planning and, and work in, urban forests and the like, urban watershed restoration. So this could be part of, systematic sustainability strategies. And of course, and the last bullet down there is that this could come onto the agenda in the form of formal climate action planning. And we had at our meeting, aside from having a good number of people who had contributed to Sustainable Cities work, we had several people who are active planners and professors of planners, and I just list two here, Michael Boswell and Tammy Seal. We tapped them because they had developed the second edition of a beautiful guide, Climate Action Planning, which provides the toolkits that, or access to the toolkits that many city managers, mayors, sustainability directors, and then heads of all kinds of other departments have been using to create coherence, but also to weave in a variety of forms of engagement involving people directly in planning, through workshops, through scenario planning, through environmental justice and equity groups, so that those views don't get left to the side as the planners go doing their work. And we also chose this because, as Mike and Tammy, made clear at our meeting, when this work is rich on the ground, you have the possibility that a state, in this case, California, picks up these toolkits, both the engagement toolkits, the environmental justice components of those toolkits, and then the technical parts of the toolkits, and leverages them into the action planning guide, into the Senate Bill SB 1000 adaptation community toolkit, so that we can see what it would look like for not only cities in a network working with various intermediaries, but then across the state, or a state, okay, and then also with some regulatory authority that is basically saying, okay, the rest of you guys, you actually have to do this. In other words, we have a good model, but now we expect you to do it. And so this is ratcheting up that capacity in a big way. And if we can switch to the next slide, and I would say in general, what we did with Tammy and Mike there, and we've done with Michael Mendez and others here, a team from the U.S. Forest Service, Lindsay Campbell in particular, and others, a team from the American Institute of Architects, the SEED network, people who are really intensely focused on some particular piece of this, the building, okay, the planning, the environmental justice, the youth engagement in Oakland. And we think that, our methodology, and then I'll stop here, is that, to reach out to as many of the creative and innovative people that are working in these different arenas, and to provide handles for them to help think through how the rest of us, meaning many other cities, many institutions, universities, intermediary organizations that are trying to help in one way or another, how they can work together. And then, as I mentioned in the beginning, how they can leverage this so that we have a coherent, or relatively speaking, coherent and robust policy that promotes engagement at the federal level, that it's not left. The unfortunate thing that often happens, I'll end on this kind of, sort of problem area. The unfortunate thing that often happens is there's a lot of money in a bill, and then it doesn't get translated into empowering communities directly and engaging youth and doing the things that needs to be done. People feel like, oh, take a deep breath, we got the money, they'll take care of that. And then sometimes they do, of course. But we'd like to see the Biden administration, future administrations, future Congresses, of course, and particular agencies to kind of run with the civic engagement piece up front. We think that our group, while by no means perfect and finished, has provided enough of a framework. You know what? This makes sense as a way of revitalizing democracy at the same time as we're addressing these huge climate challenges. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Carmen. Appreciate you sharing that overview and then diving a little bit more specifically into that section. Now I want to welcome Mary Ellen to talk a little bit about her work at the Core Network. Mary Ellen?
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you, Carmen, for inviting us to be a part of this important conversation. Next slide. So I am Mary Ellen Sprinkle. I'm the president and CEO of the Core Network, which is the National Association of Service and Conservation Corps. We have been around for about 40 years. We're based in Washington, D.C. Some of our core programs have been operating for 5 or 6 decades and have been doing conservation, climate resilience work, environmental stewardship for many, many years. We currently represent about 150 programs that are operating around the country. Our members, we refer to them as corps, and they are based on the model of the Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s. So they provide education, workforce development, life skills, sometimes wraparound services, opportunities for young people to advance their education, complete high school, earn industry-recognized certificates and credentials. Unlike the Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s, which was a large government-run program, today's corps are primarily community-based nonprofits. Some are housed in entities of state or local government or in universities. And also, unlike the Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s, that was primarily available only to white young men, corps today engage a very, very diverse group of young people. And they partner with state, local, federal, land and water management, resource management agencies to do projects on the ground that protect the environment, improve climate resilience, and respond to disasters or otherwise improve communities. Next slide. So last year, our corps engaged just over 20,000 young people. That number was a little bit higher prior to the pandemic, and it's slowly going back up. But corps engage between 20 and 25,000 young people a year. 56% identify as male, nearly 40% identify as female. over 40% identify as people of color, and about 50% come from low-income communities or families. And you can see here from the slide just a snapshot of some of the work that our cores collectively accomplished in 2021. So restored almost 650,000 acres of habitat, planted more than 240,000 trees, responded to almost 600 disasters, and weatherized nearly 2,000 homes. Next slide. So cores are doing very diverse work on our federal, state, and local public lands and in their communities. And the core network has, over the past several years, been working with the administration and Congress on a 21st century version of a civilian conservation corps. President Obama actually started us thinking about this idea under his administration. He wanted to engage many, many more young people on our federal public lands. Then Secretary Salazar and Secretary Vilsack worked with us to think about how the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Interior could support the growth of cores across the country. Of course, AmeriCorps has been a long-term partner, and many of the 20,000 Corps members that participate in cores each year are co-enrolled in AmeriCorps, so that is an important part of the support. But as many of you probably know, during his first week in office, President Biden issued an executive order on climate change, and one of the things he called for was the establishment of a civilian climate corps, engaging young people, providing workforce development, developing the next clean, sustainable workforce and environmental stewards, using existing and new funding. So we have been working with Congress and the administration over the last couple of years to promote that idea and get it included in legislation. We were very close. The original Build Back Better, the first version of the budget reconciliation package, actually included $30 billion for a new CCC, a significant amount of that going through AmeriCorps and the Department of Labor to support what I would say are sort of the people costs associated with a new climate corps, and about $10 billion. I rarely used that word before the pandemic, and now we're talking about really big numbers, which is exciting. But about $10 billion to the land management agencies for project work. So we did not get the package across the finish line in its entirety. That we were not able to get sort of the people money included, and that was along with a lot of other sort of social support programs, healthcare, childcare, things like that. But there are billions of dollars out there right now through the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act for projects for states and local governments to improve climate resilience and to promote green infrastructure, a more sustainable infrastructure. So we view, and a lot of our federal partners, I think, view those billions of dollars as an opportunity to move forward with a version of a civilian climate corps, regardless of what happened to the entire package. Next slide. Thank you. So, for example, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act included, for the Department of Energy, $3.5 billion for a variety of weather assistance programs and energy efficiency. EPA included received billions for brownfield remediation, 55 billion for water infrastructure improvements. FEMA, 3.5 billion for flood mitigation. The Department of Transportation received billions and billions of dollars for all kinds of infrastructure, transportation infrastructure that has been needing to be funded for years and years, but 1 billion for urban trails alone. The Department of Agriculture and Interior received billions of dollars for wildfire remediation and reduction, habitat restoration. And I think my colleague Marlene is going to talk a little bit about how the Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Forest Service is viewing those opportunities. The Inflation Reduction Act, again, EPA, Department of Transportation, HUD, Interior Agriculture, billions of dollars. And this is the result of, I think, underfunding those programs for decades, but it's an opportunity to not only make these important and necessary improvements to our infrastructure, switch to a more greener infrastructure, more sustainable energy, improve our national parks and our forests. So an opportunity to sort of do work that has been needed for decades. One of the challenges is that because not all, some members of Congress were opposed to increasing funding for social service programs, we are now sort of scrambling to figure out where the workforce for all of these projects comes from. So that would have been where AmeriCorps funding, Department of Labor funding would have been very, very helpful in terms of training and getting the next generation of workers trained up and ready. But I think that we can be creative with or think outside the box with how we utilize some of these funding streams to support the people and the workforce aspects of a civilian climate corps. And we are still talking with our partners at AmeriCorps, the Department of Labor, regarding how they can use the resources that they did receive and how we can continue to advocate for those pots of money. But the short, I guess, long story short, is we view this as incredible potential, and we view all of these funding sources as a way to move forward as civilian climate corps in the way that the administration and Congress envisioned. And we look forward to working with state and local government to make that happen. And actually, a number of state and local governments have already started thinking about how they can utilize existing funding, whether ARPA or CARES Act dollars or funding that they will be receiving through these various pots of money regarding how they can stand up civilian climate corps. The state of Colorado recently augmented their existing core infrastructure to create a climate-focused core. The city of Buffalo has earmarked $9 million of ARPA funding to stand up a city climate corps. And we are hearing similar stories from and interest from communities across the country. Next slide. So if you are interested in learning more about connecting with a corps that is already operating in your community to sort of grow the work that they are doing, the young people they are serving, and to help implement a lot of these projects that are coming online, or are interested in starting a corps in your community, the Corps Network is ready and willing to help. We have a starting a corps manual. We do feasibility studies. We have grant opportunities that we can extend to corps members. But we are choosing to view the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act as huge opportunities to meet some of these goals of the administration and Congress, and to develop and put on good career pathways young people working in their own communities doing this very critical work. And I believe that was my last slide. And I will turn it over to my colleague Merlene to talk about how the Forest Service in particular is thinking about how to move these ideas forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen and Carmen and Rebecca for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. It is really exciting to be able to share with you some of how the Forest Service is proposing to address the climate crisis and develop our future workforce through partnerships. When President Biden issued the executive order in January 2021 regarding the climate crisis, many of us in the federal sector who were engaged in volunteerism, workforce development, and national service were super excited about the opportunity to expand our work in support of climate resiliency, civic engagement, and people development. And it's really reassuring to hear that terminology from both Carmen and Mary Ellen about that this is about people. It's about developing people and providing more opportunities for marginalized communities. As land management agency employees, the goal of the Civilian Climate Corps couldn't have been more affirming of our mission. Fortunately, the infusion of resources from the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act has opened a window for some of the federal sector to help us deliver on the goals of the Civilian Climate Corps. We are rethinking how we partner with others to build capacity to get work done, how we develop a workforce of the future and promote economic opportunities in marginalized communities and for individuals. And the issuance of multiple executive orders by the president, by the Biden administration since early 2021 certainly generated a great deal of hope. But the passing of these two critical laws has seeded that hope. Land management agencies have never been better positioned to address climate priorities, infused with an emphasis on values that are helping us target disparities. Next slide, please. So in just the past 3 months or so, the Forest Service has released multiple strategies that are guiding how we will address this crisis. They are the Climate Adaptation Plan, the Reforestation Strategy, and the 10-year Wildfire Strategy. And there are links, when you receive the presentation, I believe these will be live links that you should be able to access these plans. Each of these strategies emphasize the importance of working with others to implement these actions. The Climate Adaptation Plan has 6 overarching actions that correspond to climate change, impacts, and vulnerabilities. One is to adapt to changing fire regimes. The second is to prepare ecosystems and watersheds for extreme events and intensifying disturbances. The third is to sustain and improve ecosystem and watershed function in the face of chronic stressors. And the fourth is to support the delivery of ecosystem products and services in a changing climate. The fifth is to deliver environmental justice through adaptation actions. And the sixth, finally, is to increase agency capacity to respond to climate change. The reforestation strategy is designed to repair existing public land by adding necessary trees, or the Replant Act, which was signed into law as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The guiding principles are to lead with science and technology, strengthen internal resources and capacity, and partner and collaborate to accelerate and amplify success. And then the 10-year wildfire strategy will permit the Forest Service to work with partners, focus on fuels and forest health treatments, be more strategic about those efforts, and increase the scale of that allows us to be responsive to the challenges of these conditions and what they do to our landscapes. And of course, using the best science, available science as a guide The plan calls for the agency to treat up to an additional 20 million acres on National Forest System land and up to an additional 30 million acres of other federal, state, tribal, and private lands. As I've noted, the common themes across all three of these strategies are collaboration, partnering, and increased capacity with an emphasis on science, evidence-based practices. Next slide, please. So when we think about the climate resilience work that we're doing, we are focused on, of course, mitigation and adaptation. We recognize that it encompasses a wide range of activities in every community across the country. We are looking at how to increase and expand projects that directly contribute to emissions reduction across all sectors of the economy, and projects that will strengthen communities and the ecosystem's ability to withstand and respond to our changing climate. These are common definitions of climate mitigation and adaptation. And the Forest Service has embraced these in a way that has been a part of how we practice our work and implement activities and our priorities for many, many decades. But as you all know, it's become extremely challenging to keep up with the increasing fire landscape and the conditions of the landscape. So nothing new, but certainly a lot more effort and resources dedicated to this work. Next slide, please. So in an effort to help us understand how we can better support the mission of the Forest Service to address climate resiliency priorities, the Forest Service worked with the Core Network early this year to deliver to survey our partners and cores about their capacity to scale up their work in support of this effort. The survey was disseminated January 28th through February 11th by the Core Network. And there were 35 questions that we were designed to help us understand non-governmental organizational capacity to support climate resilience work. 143 organizations responded, and they represented over 10,000 crew members and of those 143 respondents, 89% of them are currently working with federal agencies. 86% of those respondents reported that 86% of members who engaged by the respondents are already engaged in climate resilience. As I noted earlier, climate adaptation and mitigation is not new work for management, but the scale at which we now have to focus on has increased tremendously. And then 45% respondents indicated capacity to increase engagement by 100% in 36 months. And that's pretty impressive. And undoubtedly, that capacity, as well as much more, is essential if we are going to make the kind of impact that we are hoping to see in the next 10 years, which is the period for which the funding from the infrastructure, the Bill Act, which we call the Bill Act, and the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. That's 10-year money. So it gives us a span which we can roll out some strategies and procedures and new ways of doing business that is, again, backed by science, but will allow us to target some unique landscapes. And then we learned that partners are providing a variety of certifications to members, as Mary Ellen noted in her presentation. And these certifications are invaluable because they help prepare young people to be able to perform certain functions and tasks that support the work that the Forest Service is doing in the field. In addition to the items noted here, we found that there are some challenges that our partners have expressed about how they can relate it to scaling, and that there is, it's important to the extent possible, to allow us to provide not sufficient funding that will help partners provide a minimum wage of at least $15 per hour. There's some challenges related to that, but as we all noted, and as noted in the executive order, there is an interest in providing livable wages to the individuals who are participating in this program. And the expectation is that this infusion of resources will now provide us with an opportunity to be able to fund partners to provide that living wage of a minimum $15 per hour. Our partners wanted, respondents wanted to be very clear that this is just not about federal lands, that this is the land management climate challenges cross boundaries. And if we're not focused on what happens in cities and states and private land, that's, there is, we're not going to be able to address or achieve the outcomes that we need if it's not cross-boundary. That we need to be cognizant of funding, and that funding that will allow us to provide benefits to the individuals who are engaged, to our partners, including how we can support healthcare, and to the extent education awards that we might be able to secure through our AmeriCorps program. That it's a living allowance and a stipend are critical, but there are other benefits that will help us ensure that the individuals, and particularly those individuals from marginalized communities, have opportunities to build on this job training experience. And then housing. We all know housing is a major issue, not just for participants and when they come out into our public lands to serve and work with us, but for us as just individuals. And so you can imagine how challenging it is for our partners. We have to build systems and mechanisms that will allow us to offset the challenges that are related to housing for these cores and crews and interns to come work for us. So there was a lot more information to be had, and the link on this slide will provide you with more information about what we learned from our partners when we conducted this survey. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to take a lot of time. What has happened with the Forest Service, that there's been a comprehensive event. And there was another executive order that came out from the administration, which related to equity and how do we improve opportunities for individuals and participants and ensure that marginalized communities are thoroughly engaged. The Forest Service, the USDA has taken this very seriously.
Hi, Marlene. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We're having a little bit of hard time hearing you. Is there any way you could turn up the either mic on your computer or just maybe?
Certainly, I can get closer to that.
That would be great.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
I hope that's better. And I'm almost, yes, I'm closer. So the equity action, 1 of 10, and noted here is achieving a representative, inclusive, and thriving Forest Service workforce. What this has done is presented us with an opportunity to build on the work that we're doing in support of climate resilience by emphasizing workforce development within the Forest Service and through partnerships. Data-driven, agency-wide workforce strategy. The goal is that we are bringing in all of our third-party internship programs under one umbrella so that we can streamline processes and procedures and be more efficient. We intend to expand we will expand engagement of diverse partners because for many years we have worked with the same partners every single year. And oftentimes many of those partners are not diverse. So there is an emphasis on how we can expand who we're working with so we can reach a more diverse audience. Emphasizing accountability through reporting and improving and providing better technical assistance not only to our field, but to our partners, and certainly increasing tribal engagement. All of our public lands. lands, as we all know, are ancestral lands. We're not, and we want to see much more engagement of our communities, not only in the work that we're doing, how we do it, but as representatives of our workforce. And then, of course, our goal is that we want to be able to extend access to direct hire authority to anyone who participates in these programs as a national service member. Next slide, please. And I'm going to close with just this comment and a couple of examples of some of the work that we've done. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. Workforce development. So these are the programs that are represented as a part of the equity action item number 3 to help us achieve a representative, inclusive, and thriving Forest Service workforce. Our 21st Century Conservation Corps Service Corps programs, which Mary Ellen mentioned, that was established under President Obama. The Indian Youth Service Corps, which was recently authorized by the Dingo Act in 2019, which we are preparing to roll out in FY23. And I believe my DOI colleagues are doing the same through several of their agencies. Of course, the Youth Conservation Corps, which has been around since 1972, which targets individuals 15 to 18 for summer youth employment. Our Resource Assistance Program, which is an immersive learning, immersion internship program that provides candidates with a pathway to direct hire at the conclusion of the service, which is about 8 months to a year. And then, of course, the job force conservation centers, which the Forest Service operates, I believe, about 24. And of course, our student and other internships. All of these are programs that provide a living, a wage, and a stipend, and other benefits, training and education to participants who come to these programs. And all of them are being used to help us target climate resilience priorities through project work, whether it's in crew, internship, working with research and development, supporting other facets of how we deliver on the Forest Service mission. Next slide, please. So in closing, just want to highlight this quote from Greta Thunberg that talks about, that states clearly climate change is not only a threat, but this is it is above all an opportunity to create a healthier, greener, and cleaner planet. The federal agencies couldn't be better positioned to do that now. There are a couple of examples of the work that we have, projects that have occurred in the Forest Service. The Urban Food Forest at Browns Mill is the first of its kind, providing fresh produce in a community that has limited access to affordable health foods. The Student Conservation Corps has historically worked with the Forest Service on fielding fire recovery teams and crews and fire training academies. The Montana Conservation Corps Sky Watershed Corps program has engaged interns to support pollinator initiatives. And then our Historic Corps and Rapido Conservation Corps provide opportunities for us to support recreation access so that more people have opportunities to value the public lands legacy that's available to them through recreation. And then, of course, there's the Still Metal Community Peace Park and Forest, which is all about green spaces such as parks, playgrounds, and this is located in Baltimore. So, and what they've done is it's a partnership with Still Metal Community Fellowship Church, which transformed a 10-acre swath of neglected forest in Southwest Baltimore. These examples illustrate that the possibilities and the opportunities that exist on our forests, in cities and urban communities, and in working with communities to address climate resilience priorities. So I know that we are running out of time. I know you have questions. I will stop there and say thank you for allowing us to share this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marlene, and to all of our speakers, appreciate your time. We do have a couple of minutes for questions, so I want to first give our speakers an opportunity to follow up on anything your fellow presenters said that you would like to either elaborate on or clarify, while we have others joining the queue to either chat your questions or use the raise hand feature if you want to ask a question directly. I'm happy to unmute you. Right, I will go ahead and start with a question. I think one of the things that that is of particular interest to the league and that we've seen is, we have all of these sort of local actions that have bright spots and show progress, but a criticism of them is always, scale and scope. So are there any recommendations for how we can really expand upon and grow some of these promising local solutions so that they have broader reach and impact? And feel free to dive in, whoever would like to answer that.
Well, I can take an initial stab, and then Carmen can cover whatever I miss. I mean, that is sort of the purpose of the core network, is to provide training and technical assistance, help stand up new cores. We have a model that includes education, workforce development, environmental stewardship. Core members need to be paid a stipend, living allowance, or wage. But aside from that, cores are very flexible depending on the communities in which they're located. So they might be doing solar panel installation in one community, they might be doing fuels mitigation in another, they might be tending to urban farms, or building campgrounds, or installing EV charging stations. So within sort of the framework of the core model, the core network is able to go into a community, get the stakeholders together, wide variety of stakeholders, make sure that underrepresented communities and populations are involved in the conversation, identify potential host organizations, and help the community maybe figure out what a core could look like in their community, and potentially identify some funding to get it off the ground. And that might be an AmeriCorps planning grant, or it might be a local foundation, or it might be project work. But I would say that what we are seeing in 150 communities across the country is extremely replicable and scalable. And we've been having conversations with the administration. The Obama administration wanted to go to 100,000 core members very quickly. This administration would like to get to 300,000. And I think that the cores that we are seeing come together rather quickly in states and communities across the country is evidence that that it can be done, it can be successful. There's a will and a need. And I will stop there and let my colleagues jump in.
Yeah, Rebecca's concern is, of course, very important, and we address this in a variety of ways. So let me just take two. One is, we would like to see each federal agency sketch what is its civic mission in relation to climate change, and what is its civic strategy. Very significant points which the agency has to address in a systematic fashion. Now, that doesn't provide the money. We need the money then and the staffing, so that people come in, and so that when there's not just 10 grants for, let's say community action for renewed environment, environmental justice, there's 20, 30, 40 building up. In other words, there's a network, and a network of people who are training together and sharing lessons. In the CARE program, within 5 years, we had 100 communities, and they were meeting every year to share those lessons. And even that's not enough. In other words, we can do that, but often often these grants are just at the community level, are just created to say, okay, well, we know we need community grants, and certain people will yell and scream at us if we don't put them on, so we'll have 10, and there'll be innovation grants. They'll proof of, etc. And I would say something which is not on anybody's agenda really, is that I would create funds in the relevant agencies so that every single professional association and association of professional schools has a couple $1 million at least to say, this is how we're going to profoundly change the way we train this generation of architects, planners, disaster management officials, etc., so that they learn, while they learn the technical skills, they learn how to work with communities. They become democratic professionals. And it's driven through, and we have models of this in selective universities. But and we often think, oh, well, community-based work is for community-based organizations. Well, yes, that's true. But unless we build a capacity of partners, and in that I would throw groups like a real expansion of the capacity of the extension network, sea grant and land grant folks who are working with communities. We have to look at various types of institutions and ask Rebecca's question. What would it take resource-wise to ratchet this up in a strategic fashion over 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years? Not just so we could put a line in there and says, oh, we look like we're innovative. And I'm not saying this is what's happening. And there's tons of great people that are doing the right thing, but we often slip back into that mode. It has to be a systematic investment strategy in each of these types of institutions.
Wonderful. I think I love that term, democratic professionals. I think we need to get that embedded everywhere we can. We are unfortunately out of time. We do have a couple questions in the chat, but what I'm going to do is ask for the speakers to give me their permission to share their email addresses in my follow-up email. That way people can reach out to you directly with questions if it's okay. We also are recording, so again, the recording and slides will be emailed to you along with a follow-up email. I just want to take a quick second to extend a heartfelt thanks to Carmen, Mary Ellen, and Marlene for putting this together for us and spending your afternoon with us, and of course to all of you for being on the call. Quick plug for our next webinar. We're going to be talking about how to foster youth leadership in community building and belonging efforts. So please join us on December 13th for that. I'll include a registration link for that in my follow-up email as well. And with that, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll be in touch shortly.
Thank you all.